Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, let's talk about my most disappointing books of 2021. Okay, so if you want to see me gush about my favorite books, I've already uploaded my top 10 favorite sci-fi fantasy books of 2021, my favorite non-sci-fi fantasy books of 2021, and my almost favorites. So I've done a lot of gushing, but now it's time to do a little bit of ranting. So I'm going to go in the order of my least favorite. Does that make sense at all? No, it does not. I'm going to go in the order of the best of the worst to the worst of the worst, if that makes sense. Oh boy. So let's just get right into it. All right, starting with the most meh. It was just a disappointment. It's not that I disliked this trilogy, it was just not what I thought it was going to be, and I just was so indifferent towards it. It's the His Dark Materials trilogy. This was so beloved. Like, everyone loves this trilogy. And so I read it because I had never read it as a child. And I was like, what am I missing out on? And there was the HBO series and it looked so good. And I had these pretty covers for it. It was just the most meh experience I've had in a long time. I felt very indifferent towards all of it. It was a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. Like, this did not read like a middle grade series to me at all. It was much more mature than I was expecting. It was not whimsical or like fun to read for me. Like, I did not have fun reading this series. The first book, I will say, I enjoyed the first book. I thought that one was the most fun, but the next two books in the series were not fun. They were like dark, complex, religious, like politics and corruption, and just like, what is this? This is not what I thought it was going to be at all. So maybe that's on me, because I thought going into it, it was like this fun, whimsical middle grade that hit on some darker themes. I had heard, you know, about the darker themes and was like, okay, it's going to like go there. But like, I didn't realize like that was it. Like it is its themes. That's what I felt like. Like, I felt like the themes overtook the story. And there's a character that's introduced in the second book that I wasn't a huge fan of. And like Lyra in the first book I really enjoyed, but then just kind of like increasingly got, I don't know, more indifferent towards Lyra. I just don't know. It's not that I disliked it. It was just very meh. And it was not the most fun reading experience. Not that all reading has to be fun. I'm not saying that because it wasn't fun that made it bad. Like, nothing like that. It was just not what I was expecting. That's all. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't good. Okay. Now that I've started with a very controversial opinion, let's go to Heart of Flames by Nicki Pau-Preto. This was so long. This was so long. Why did it have to be that long? It did not have to be that long. The audiobook was like 24 hours long. Does it have to be that long? No. The answer is no. It did not have to be that long. This series, I'm not going to continue on with it. I wasn't the biggest fan of Crown of Feathers, and that's on me for deciding to continue on with the series when I felt very meh about the first book already. I liked the ending of the first book, and I liked the sister relationship and kind of the reveals towards the end. I really liked, and I wanted to see that explored more. It wasn't explored to the extent I thought it was going to be in the second book. The world building is fine. Like, I think that this YA fantasy does a good job of world building. It didn't feel like anything new. It felt very much like that typical YA fantasy that I've read before. It didn't bring anything like unique. I didn't really like any of the characters. I thought that this one just dragged. Oh my goodness. I would have DNF'd this book had it not been for a readathon that I was doing. It was a competitive readathon that the Shelf Space Discord community was hosting this past summer. And it was basically like, if you complete a book, you get this many points, and if it's this long of a book, it's this many points. So I had finished like 50% of the audiobook and was like, I can't DNF it now. I've put in so much of this time, and if I DNF it, it's not going to count for anything for this readathon. So I finished it because of the readathon. I shouldn't have pushed myself to finish it. This is one that I would have DNF'd had it not been for that. It's fine. Like, a lot of people love this series, so I think I'm definitely in the minority. It's well written, the world building's cool, the animal companion aspect is fun. It just didn't do enough for me, and I just didn't love the characters, really. They felt very bland. Have I made anyone mad yet? All right, let's go to Clown in a Cornfield by Cesare. This was to be fair, I did not know that this was young adult horror. I thought this was adult horror when I picked it up. And it follows these kids in high school in this small town where there's this killer clown. It sounded so much fun. And I have discovered this year a lot about myself as a reader. I don't like slashers. I don't like horrors that lean into that slasher genre. I just don't like them. I don't find them fun or thrilling or scary. I just kind of like get annoyed. And the high schoolers were just so aggravating. Like, I didn't root for any of the characters. And the ending with, like, once you know, like, who is doing what and why, it's like, what? It's so weird. It's like the weirdest reveal. I did not like it at all. I thought there were a couple of really fun scenes in this book when it like really leaned into its horror. There were a couple scenes that were fun, of like sneaking around and like the creepy clown where you're not sure like what it is, who it is, like that kind of stuff was fun. But then like once you know what's going on, you're like, what? This is the weirdest reason to be doing this ever. I don't get it. Let's talk about The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. I am not giving up on Ruth Ware yet, and I really should. The only one I've liked by her is Turn of the Key, and that one I still didn't even love because I really didn't like the twist at the end of Turn of the Key, but I loved the rest of that story so much. This one, Death of Mrs. Westaway, I thought was going to be like creepy gothic like thriller. It was the most boring thriller I've ever read. It was a slow burn mystery. It was very, emphasis on the slow, very slow. And the main character repeats the same thing over and over and over again in this book. I was so annoyed by the end of it, and I didn't want to stop listening because I wanted to know. Like, with thrillers, they're short enough, and you just want to know. You've invested all that time, and you just want to know what the heck is going on. And when you find out, it's like, oh, fine, whatever. But it was just so slow and boring. I'm sorry, Ruth Ware fans. This was not for me. I really want to pick up One by One, though. Will I like that one? Based on my experience with Death of Mrs. Westaway, I don't know. But I haven't given up on this author yet. But I think if I have one more bad experience, I'm going to, because I felt very lukewarm about all of her books. We have one more 3-star. So these are like the ones that, it's not that I like really disliked them or anything. I just felt like meh or whatever about them. Okay, the last 3-star, it was disappointing for sure, but I liked enough of some of the stuff that happened that I was like, overall, still gonna rate it 3 stars. It's The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. I think that this one rates lower on this scale of disappointing books because it was like the conclusion to a trilogy that previously I had loved the first 2 books. Love the first 2 books in the Poppy War trilogy. And this one was so disappointing to me. I think that the reason I really like part 1. I really like where we start off. It's slow, but I really like it. It felt like the first 2 books. The problem was part 2 of this book was this amazing build-up towards something that was going to hopefully be epic. Like, I was so excited for what we were building towards. And then it was nothing. It was pointless. It was like there was no reason for it. What? I was so mad at how meandering and meaningless a lot of this book felt. And by the time we got to the ending itself was fine. I want to make that clear. How this book ended was not the problem. I've heard Angela from Literature Science Lyons talk about this book as well, and I feel so similar to how she feels, where it's kind of like Game of Thrones season 8. Oh, sorry to bring that up. I'm so sorry. But like, the ending is not the problem. It's how we got to the ending. And by the time we get to that part 3, we had spent so much time on this other stuff that became meaningless that the part 3 felt rushed. And then I feel, I haven't really seen anyone else say this, but I feel like I loved Rin. I loved Rin in the first 2 books. Now, I didn't want to be best friends with Rin. She wasn't a great person, but I loved her character, and I loved following her and seeing her decisions that were not great most of the time, but she was fascinating. And I felt like she did something so out of character at the end that I just didn't even find her fascinating anymore. It eventually felt like I don't even care now what happens to this character after some things that happened. So I was just so disappointed. I've seen so many mixed reviews on this finale. Some people find it beautiful and perfect and brilliant, and I can see why. Like, the ending itself was like how it should have ended. Like, I can't see any other way it could have ended. It's just how we got there is where people are divided, and I'm unfortunately in the disappointed camp. So that's that one. Now let's get into some that I like actively disliked. And to be honest, there are only 3. So overall, it was still a very good reading year. Let's talk about the one that is not as bad as the other 2, but that I still really didn't like. Fate of the Fallen by Kade. God. This one was supposed to be fun. I thought I was going to have a lot of fun with this one. It seemed like it was a lighthearted adult fantasy that followed. It was kind of pitched as like Sam and Frodo, kind of friendship, like buddy-buddy chosen one and his best friend going on their journey. But what if the chosen one, like something happens to him and it's the best friend that has to step up? And like, that sounded so fun. Like, it was like a flipping the chosen one trope on its head. Unfortunately, I didn't love the execution of it. It felt very like juvenile. Like, there were some jokes in here and some like gags that I think were supposed to be like funny, but I found them very annoying. Like, there's this one running gag through the entire book that I couldn't stand, and it kept grating on me. Every time the author would do this thing, I would get more and more annoyed. And if you've read the book, I think you might know what I'm talking about. With this one gag, why did you keep doing that? And then I hated the world building. The world building made no sense to me. There was this whole thing about prophecies and the importance of prophecies, and once something happens to make that prophecy no longer possible, like, you're screwed. Like, that's it. Everyone gives up. And it made no sense, because then at the same time, later in the story, someone changes a prophecy and they're like, oh yeah, you can change the prophecies. But then we had just said that you can't. Like, there were so many like contradicting world building details that like didn't make sense at all. I didn't like the characters. It was so And the way it starts was like so jarring, because it felt like there were these characters that were going to like a prom, but like fantasy edition. It was just weird. It was just weird. I could see why, if you're maybe like looking for a lighthearted adult fantasy, like that could work, but it did not work for me at all. It just felt so cringy. I couldn't. I'm so sorry if you like this book. These I disliked a lot. I disliked them a lot. Okay. Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson. I feel like I've ranted about this one a lot, because I've ranted about it in a World Hoppers video. I ranted about it in a live show with Elle and with Jess from Jess Owens. So I feel like I've talked about this one a lot, but I don't know that I've talked about it at that same length on my channel. Cytonic. Okay. So I love Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I loved Skyward. Skyward was 5 out of 5 stars. It made my top 10 favorite sci-fi fantasy books list. It was fantastic. I loved the mysteries. I loved the questions that it was asking. And I loved needing to know the answers. I had to know, and it kept me turning the pages. Then you get some of the answers in Starsight. You get some of them, and you start kind of expanding the world. And I was like, okay, like this is fine. There were some answers that were like a little suspect, but I was like, okay, no, this I can accept this. That's fine. And I still like the themes of Starsight. Some of the characters I really like. Then we get to Cytonic, and not only are we missing a lot of characters that I want to follow, like that are from the previous books, but we get answers that I hated. I wish those questions had never been answered. I wish they had just stayed a mystery the whole series. I really, really disliked the answers to pretty much every question in this book. I really didn't like it. And there was one final reveal at the end, one final question that was answered, and it made me so mad. I was like, this is what I've been waiting for? Are you kidding? This was it? We've been building and building, and we've been teasing, and oh my God, that's it? That's the answer to this question? Are you kidding? I couldn't stand it. I really dislike this. So I don't know how I feel about this series anymore. I still love Skyward. I still love it because it was such a fun book, and I love the characters, and I love the camaraderie, and I loved the mysteries. But Cytonic felt so much younger. Like there were some stakes in the previous 2 books that really high stakes and like real consequences that the characters were facing. And I feel like that went away in this book. Like there were no consequences, there were no stakes. It felt very, very young. Like it just, every book has kind of felt younger and younger. And this one, I think that for the target audience, you know, it's hard to judge because this is a YA fantasy, sci-fantasy, whatever it is. This is YA, and I'm not the target audience. So I feel like a lot of the target audience is gonna love this. It's just not for me. I've seen so many people love it, and I know that Jess and Elle, they still enjoyed it. Like they didn't dislike it as much as me. They didn't love it, but they still like enjoyed it. I did not enjoy it. So I think I'm definitely in the minority. So it's hard to just say like, oh no, never read this series because you might love it. But oh man, I wish that I didn't know any of the answers. All right, finally, my least favorite book of the year. Oh, God, this one made me so mad. And it is The Ruin of Kings by Jenn Lyons. So, okay, this was a buddy read at the very beginning of last year with Elle from Elliot Brooks and I. And neither of us liked it all that much. And the problem with it is that it has a really clever premise. However, the way it's told, you have a main character who's in a jail cell, and the jailer is asking that main character to tell his story. So he's like, okay, let me tell you my story and how I got here. Fine. So he starts telling his story to you, and that's kind of the beginning of the book. But then all of a sudden the jailer's like, no, stop. I know your story better than you, and I'm going to tell your story instead. So now you have two separate narrators of the same character's story, and they're in two separate timelines. So you have one timeline that's in the way past and one timeline that's in the more recent past. And you have two separate narrators, but they're narrating the same character's story. And then on top of that, you also have magic that's introduced that includes resurrections, it includes shapeshifters, it includes people who can disguise themselves as other people, or people who can control others using certain things. And all of a sudden, you realize that literally not one character in this book is who they say they are. And if that's not confusing enough, it is still told in two separate timelines where you have different parts of the book, and you have time jumps, and you have, oh my God. You also have footnotes, and another character is telling their story in the footnotes. Back to the video. It was the most confusing book where I feel like I should have just stopped and started taking notes and mapping out graphs. Like, I feel like that one character from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia who's trying to figure out like the mail thing. That's what I felt like. I was like, who is this? And they're actually this, and this person's this, and we're this, and but here's the problem with it. It wasn't necessary. It didn't have to be that confusing. I think you can either choose one thing or the other. You can either have magic that's like super like complex where people can be other people, there's resurrections, you can have shapeshifters that can turn themselves into other people. Like, fine, you can have that, but then tell it in like a normal narrative structure. Or you can do like the weird timeline thing with the two separate narrators of the same character, but don't have a magic system where everybody can be different people. Oh my God, it was so unnecessary. It was so unnecessary. There was too much. I couldn't do it. And by the end, I was so angry with the book, and it made me feel so stupid. I couldn't stand this book. I really, really disliked it. Props to the author for having the ambition to try this, and a lot of people like it, so it works for a lot of people. So I mean, props to the author, right, for doing that and going for it and trying this and it working for a lot of people. I just think I'm too basic of a person and too basic of a reader to enjoy something like that. I never want my reading to feel like a chore, like where I have to like do homework in order to understand what's going on. Like, I don't want to have to like map out character family trees and graph, do all of the crazy charts and stuff. I don't want to have to do that to keep up with what's going on in a story. But some people like that, so, you know, to each their own. But this was my least favorite. I really didn't like it. I would have DNF'd it had it not been a buddy read. It made me so mad. It made me so mad. So, those were my most disappointing books of 2021. Hopefully you didn't see any that you love on this list, and if you did, I'm so sorry. What was your most disappointing read of 2021? Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to know. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!